Oh, hi, Taman. Today I'm going to show you how to do an histogram of a data set that we used last class, the one for John. Remember the data had observations of behavior for baseline and intervention phases, right? It had 30 observations, okay? So let me show you how to do those histograms which will show the distribution of your data set in a histogram, right? Okay, let's first start reviewing what's a frequency, right? And frequency of a data set refers to the number of times a specific value appears or occurs within a data set. For example, you have a data set composed of these numbers: 3, 4, 3, 5, 3, 4. Those can be the ages of little kids in a birthday party, right? Okay, so if I want to build a frequency table of these values, then I will say value 3 appears 3 times, value 4 appears 2 times, and value 5 appears one time. So these values will be the frequency values of this data set, right? Frequency can be also calculated for categorical data. For example, you can say how many toys are white, how many toys are blue, how many toys are red. In that case, the categories would be the colors, right? And then you will have a count of how many toys you have in each category. So you can build frequency tables as well as graph for data like that, okay? Frequency can be expressed in two ways. It can be expressed as absolute values or percentages, right? This absolute values is called absolute frequency, which is the one that you have over here in this data set. It's just the count of how many times each value appears, right? And then you can also express frequency as percentage values, right? So that would mean you will calculate the percentages of appearance of the value 3 with respect to the total number of values, and that would be the relative frequency. That's called relative frequency, okay? So now that we have that clear out, we will work with a histogram of absolute frequencies. So we will just use counts, right? We will have the values. This is a small data set, right? But say you have maybe 100 values, right? And they're all dispersed, in values from say 6 and then 20s and 30s and 40s or maybe even 90s, right? So if you have 100 values that are more or less spread out in those values, then you will want to divide those values in what? In intervals. You want to put intervals, so you would say how many values I have from 0 to 10, and then maybe from 10 to 20, and so on and so forth. And once you start to do that, then what you're doing is putting your values or counting your values within intervals, right? So that's what a histogram does, right? It puts the number of values within two limits, right? The lower limit and the upper limit, right? Of that interval, okay? So let's see how we do that in Excel. So Taman, here are the data. It's this file, this Excel file. The first thing I want to know, or I want to make sure, is that I copy the data correctly. So I am going all the way down in this column to make sure that I have my 30 points or 30 scores. So I come down here. Yes, I am in row 31. That means I have 30 scores plus the name of John on the first row. So my data is okay. So the three things that you have to be aware of when you do a histogram in Excel and in any other platform or program that you use to draw these things is three things. What is your maximum value? Let me see if I can write a little bit. What is the maximum value of your data? What's the minimum value of your data? And maybe think about the number of intervals that you are going to put this data into. So number of intervals, minimum value, and maximum value. So for our data, since we discussed last class, our maximum value is right here. I put it in yellow, it's 22, so I'm going to put it right there. And our minimum value is 6. So the data spreads out in a range between 6 and 22, okay? So minimum value is 6. Okay, so let's say that we choose to have 5 intervals to separate this data into bars, right? And so I'm going to put here the number 5, okay? Now, what would be the width of each of those intervals so that when I get to the last interval, I do capture the number 22, okay? And so some people use a formula that is quite interesting, and it says that the width of the interval might be given by a formula called the range over the number of intervals that you specify, and then you add 1. You want to add this 1 because you want to, in any case, always have an extra interval at the end so that the highest number gets captured within a bar or within an interval, okay? So for our data, the range is defined as the maximum number minus the minimum number, which is 6. The number of intervals that we chose is 5, and then I put my 1 here, and if I do this math, then I'm going to have the width of 4.2. Okay, doing this math and 5 intervals, I have a width of each interval as 4.2. Okay, so 4.2 might not be the greatest value for the width of my intervals, so maybe I round it up to the value of 4.5. So I'm going to have 5 intervals right here. I'm going to use my red pen. 5 intervals right here with a width of 4.5 each interval, okay? Okay, so the first consideration to making histograms is this bar. Knowing your maximum, your minimum, the number of intervals that you want for separating the data, and to calculate your width. Okay, the second thing you want to do with your histogram is to avoid ambiguity. Okay, I'm going to write here, avoid ambiguity. That's a funny word that it's also in Spanish. In Spanish, you say ambigüedad. Okay, so what's ambiguity in this case? Ambiguity is, for example, if you have a score of 10 in your data, exactly 10. One of the scores in one of those sessions is 10, and then you have intervals set up like this, 0 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 15, and so on, then you wouldn't know where to put this value. Why? Because it could be in here, second interval, or it could be in here. Do you agree, Taman? Right? Because the limit of this interval is 10, and the beginning of this interval is 10, so you wouldn't know where to put this value. Does it go here or does it go here? So in order to avoid that, then if you add a decimal point to the limits of intervals, then you solve that problem. Let me show you. So you will set up your intervals like this, from 0 to 5.5, then from 5.5 to 10.5, then from 10.5 to 15.5, and so on. So now in this manner that you're setting your intervals, then you are pretty sure that the score 10 goes into the second interval, right? Because this is the range or the width of the interval that will capture number 10, right? Okay, Taman, now that we set up the intervals for our histogram, I want you to notice that we figured before the width of the interval as 4.5 right here. But now, since we have two decimal numbers or two decimal points for our intervals, then the width of the interval becomes what? 4.55. 4.55, right? So how did I calculate these intervals? You might be thinking, right? So to this number, I added 4.55, and then it gave me 910. To 910, I added 4.55, and then I obtained 13.65, and so on and so forth. So now the width of the interval, and I'm going to put it right here, the width of the interval is 4.55, okay? Okay, Taman, now let's go and build this with Excel, okay? What Excel requires is that you build a column called the beans column. And it's this column C. You see it there, it's called beans. And beans is just, I'm going to put it here so that you don't forget, beans is the upper limit of each interval, okay? And so what is the upper limit of each interval? I'm going to use my red pen. And so the upper limit of my first interval is the value 4.55. For the second interval is 9.10. For the third interval is 13.65. For the fourth interval is 18.20. And for the last interval is 22.75. So I will have to build my beans column with those values, right? So they're right there. I am showing it to you. I am selecting them. And so I have 5 values with the upper limits of each interval, okay? Okay, Taman, here I am back. I took a few minutes to erase all my handwriting so that we can have the space to build our histogram. So this is the easy part. So you may be wondering, oh my God, so every time I have to draw a frequency distribution in a histogram, I would have to go through all that. And I believe it's a good idea to go through all that. It's not difficult math or anything, but once you solve, the number of intervals and the width of your intervals and your ambiguity, then you will have a perfect histogram in Excel, and I'll show you how, okay? So I have my bin numbers right here: 4.55, 910, 1365, 18.2, and 22.75. So within those intervals, I am going to calculate now the frequency. So I'm going to have to read into this column and ask Excel to fill how many numbers are in this column, the first column, our data, within these limits, okay? So the way I do it, I put myself right there in that cell, and I go into the function line, and I go equals, and then I type frequency. As I am typing, then it shows up, right? The word frequency shows up. So if you read that, it says calculate how often values occur within a range of values, and then returns a vertical array of numbers having one more element than Bin's array. Okay, so it will give you one. That's why I put an extra green cell right there. Okay, so if I go double click, then it'll write the word for me, and it'll open the parentheses, and then this thing here displays how the format should be, right? In this case, it says, okay, parentheses data array. So that refers to your data. So you go and select your data, and so first column, go from row number 2 to row number 31, and that's your data, right? And then don't push enter just now, because what? It'll ask you to put a comma right there, and then it'll ask you to for your bins, right? For your upper limits of each interval. So then you select your bins right there, like that. Then you close the parentheses, and then now you go enter. And now these numbers appear, right? 0 for the first interval, 8 numbers for the second interval, 8 numbers for the third interval, 5 numbers for the fourth interval, and 9 numbers in the last interval, right? Okay, that's great. That's that I'm getting closer and closer and closer. So what I do with this data is that then I conform another table, and this table is the table that is going to allow me to draw my histogram the way I want, okay? Why don't I use this one? Because it doesn't have the name of the interval spelled correctly, right? So I built another table that says, okay, here my intervals are from 0 to 4.55. I can even put a 0.00 here to be consistent with the decimal. So it would be from 0.00 to 4.55, from 4.55 to 910, from 910 to 1365, from 1365 to 1820, and then the last one, it would be 1820 to 20.75. Okay, so I don't have to calculate frequency again, because I already calculated it right here, right? So what do? I select these numbers, then I go up here into the ribbon, and then I say copy, but then I will copy in a way that I don't copy the formula, just the values, okay? And how do I do that? I go into here, the paste, and I look at paste values, and the first icon here, that's where I press, and so now I have the numbers, but I don't have any formula in there, okay? I don't want any formula in there, because then Excel won't be able to build my histogram, okay? So from now on, things are very easy, okay? So what do? I select my data like that without the titles, okay? And I go into the insert recommended charts. I go to all charts, then I pick histogram, and there it is. This is the kind of histogram I want, right? I want a histogram that has a vertical and a horizontal axis plus bars, okay? So I select that one. I go okay, and the first thing I want is to fix the vertical axis, okay? And so I select the vertical axis, and which is the maximum value that should go in there. The maximum value for the vertical axis or scale is the highest number in your frequency, or a little more, right? So here in your frequency, you have the highest value to be 8, right? So maybe I set my values from 0 to 10 just to leave it extra space on top, right? So you already know this, so you go into this plus sign, you look for the axis, and then you look for the arrow here, and you pick more axis options. And there, since you have selected the vertical axis, then the first thing you want to do is the bounds. The minimum value would be 0 and the maximum would be, let's put a 10 right there. Okay, now I go enter, and so I now have my axis, vertical axis correctly. It goes from 0 to 10. Okay, I get out of the drawing, right, and I'm gonna put it right here, and then I will work with my horizontal axis. If you notice, it only has 2 intervals, right? So it's wrong because my intervals are right here, First of all, there are 5 of them, and second of all, they are distributed in a way that they have 2 decimals each, okay? So I'm going to select my horizontal scale right there, and I'm going to here to work with my horizontal scale. So I'm going to go more axis options. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose by category, and look what happens. It gives you the histogram that you want, and it's pretty good, right? Because it resembles, or is exactly what the numbers here in the table display, okay? So in the first interval, you don't have any values. In the second interval, you have 8 values, and the third interval, you have 8 values. Then in the fourth interval, you have 5 values, and in the ninth interval, you have in the fifth interval, you have 9 values, okay? So you can also put the number of values by picking here data labels, right? And so it puts the numbers of each of the bars that have the values. Okay, so maybe if you don't like the first interval because it has 0 values, then you can redo your histogram and only select the fourth interval, the 4 intervals that have values, right? So let's do that. Let's change this histogram. I'm going to delete it, and I'm just going to pick, see if this works. Okay, I'm going to pick this 4, and I'm going to go insert recommended charts, and go and pick histogram. I pick that one. I work with my vertical axis. I go in here, I go into axis option, and I go maximum 10. Okay, very good. Then I get out of the drawing, and then I pick my horizontal axis, and then I go by category, and then I have that. And so that's very nice because, see, if you look at the horizontal axis, it has the upper and the lower limit of each interval, and then put the data values, and then it has the number that each interval has. So the last thing I would do is to put the chart title, which would be, in this case, it would be John's absolute frequencies. Okay, so that's great. So I am finished, and I built, okay, maybe I can put it in bold letter, but I have to go like that and select it. And so that's great. So now I have my histogram. So okay, so I guess we can change the color of the bars. If you put shift and then select one of those bars, then you will select them all. You see that there are little dots, blue dots. meaning, okay, you now are working with your bars. So format data series, then you have two options. You have the fill, so you can work with the fill, which is the will give you different ways to fill up your bars. Maybe look what happens. Maybe your gradient fill. That's a nice a way to fill up your bars, or maybe you can just use a totally no fill, right? So that doesn't look too good. Solid fill, and then choose a color right there. Okay, so that's it, man. So you can make now any histogram of any data set that you can imagine. And I hope that you can practice a little bit so that you feel comfortable making these drawings, okay? Thank you for your attention. I'm sorry that this took a little longer, but I think it's worthwhile to learn this, okay? See you next Monday, Tamam. Bye-bye.